What OPEC Plus decision hurt Putin? Is Hamas ready to surrender or negotiate? Who is Trump expecting at the White House on Monday? And how might it impact the Russia-Ukraine war? We're discussing it all. I'm Iryna Uzlova, joined by Israeli journalist and Radio Zvi editor-in-chief Zvi Zilber. Shalom, glory to Ukraine. Hail to the heroes, Shalom. It's good to see you too. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we're focusing on the major OPEC Plus decision. I noticed it early this morning. Yuri Bogdanov, a publicist and strategic communications expert, believes it could be momentous, not just due to Trump's potential involvement, but because OPEC Plus has decided to increase oil production, pushing prices down. If this continues, Bogdanov says, Putin could feel serious consequences in a few months. How do you see this? Could it become a real problem for Russia's oil economy, especially with Trump not yet active? Russia is part of OPEC Plus, but its voice seems to have been ignored. Firstly, there are processes within OPEC Plus that are mostly understood only by specialists. For several years now, the member countries have been trying to circumvent the established commitments, seeking to sell as much oil as possible. Russia's attack on Ukraine and the situation in Iran have made the market chaotic, and now it is almost impossible to track exactly who is producing and selling how much. There is already a tendency to violate quotas. OPEC Plus countries act in their own interests and sell oil on their own. OPEC Plus is a cartel whose goal is to maintain high oil prices and actually speculate on it. It has been able to accomplish these tasks, but in the distribution of quotas, many countries consider themselves disadvantaged and demand a larger share. This is what causes internal friction. I am not going to judge the details, as it is better understood by specialized experts, but such processes do take place.
Как вы понимаете, когда назначают какие-то квоты, то очень многие страны считают себя обиженными, обделенными, что им положено гораздо большая квота, чем другим, и, соответственно, отсюда такое движение. Впрочем, я не берусь об этом судить, поскольку, в этом разбираются специалисты, я не очень в этом понимаю, но такие процессы есть. Второе, я думаю, что таким образом, да, хотят дать понять всем петрократиям, опасным петрократиям, да, потому что есть петрократии, которые занимаются тем, что увеличивают свое богатство, а есть петрократии, которым богатство уже надоело, и они распространяют по всему миру свою террористическую деятельность.
They want to make it clear to them that oil prices will decline, so they should not count on the same income. First of all, this concerns Iran, which is now under pressure to accept the ultimatum and stop the expansion of its Islamic revolution. Since there has been no regime change, it is actually being offered to close itself inside and gradually turn into the likeness of North Korea. If Tehran is counting on an inflow of funds for economic recovery, development of its nuclear program, support for Hezbollah, Shiite groups in Iraq, the new regime in Syria, Hamas and other projects, there will be no money, there are no sources of funding, so the only thing left is to accept the conditions put forward by Trump. He, by the way, explicitly states there are no negotiations with Iran and no plans. According to him, it is pointless to discuss the nuclear program because it no longer exists. If the Iranians want to offer something, let them get in touch. For his part, he is not going to offer anything. As a result, Iran finds itself in an extremely vulnerable position.
Если они мне хотят что-то сказать, то пусть обращаются, пусть позвонят, они и предлагают. Я ничего им не предлагаю, мне никакие переговоры сейчас не нужны. И иранцы действительно сейчас оказались в такой яме.
On the one hand, Iran announces its withdrawal from the IAEA and claims that the agency cannot now exercise control. This is certainly a violation of international norms. The West has expressed its displeasure, but in essence, Iran now has nothing to hide. There is not much left of its nuclear program. The Bushehr reactor is the only significant facility, but it is civilian and poses no threat, so there is nothing much for inspectors to do there. All in all, This is one more reason for the US and Europe not to lift sanctions on Iran. As a result, the country is becoming more and more dependent on China, which buys Iranian oil at huge discounts. Now it will probably buy even cheaper. This is a signal not only to Iran, but also to Putin. Oil is getting cheaper, revenues are falling, and the budget is no longer coming together. It's time to end the war.
И Китай и так у них все это выжимает с очень-очень большими дисконтами, с очень высокими скидками. Сейчас, наверное, будет брать у них это все еще дешевле, и это такой сигнал Ирану. Ну и сигнал Путину тоже, что нефть подешевеет, и у тебя не будут сходиться дебет с кредитом, поэтому давай заканчивай войну.
The latest phone conversation between Trump and Putin apparently irritated Trump. He has realized that talking to Putin is a futile exercise that is only used by Russian propaganda to show supposed international weight and recognition. Putin then shows that world leaders, then Macron, then Trump, are talking to him and pretends as if this confirms his importance. At the same time, he continues to claim that Russia will not give up the goals of the so-called NWO. In this context, lower oil prices become an effective pressure tool. We talked about this early on when Trump first won the election. It was one of his promises to voters. Drill, baby, drill. Oil and gasoline should flow through the ground again, and Americans will be able to drive their huge SUVs without thinking about the costs. He emphasized that world oil prices must come down, and repeated this during a visit to Saudi Arabia.
Американцы снова смогут ездить на этих своих огромных джипах, вот, не считая денег. Но да, он говорил об этом, что цены на нефть в мире должны упасть. Об этом он говорил во время своего визита в Саудовскую Аравию.
I think we will really see a drop in oil prices in the near future. All the alarmist statements about the supposedly inevitable global economic crisis in the event of falling prices are, in my opinion, exaggerated. Many economists, especially libertarians, don't see this as a problem. For example, in Argentina, Javier Milei is actively developing shale oil production, which will also increase supply on the market. Of course, a certain minimum price level is important for the shale industry, but it is still a long way off. In the current conditions, oil is only one of the factors, and by itself it is not able to change the situation dramatically. However, the impact will be tangible, especially for aggressive petrocracies, which will face serious problems due to lower revenues. Zvi, do you think that Trump could be the factor that really affects Putin, that will bring him down politically and set an example for others to follow? You said from the very beginning that after Trump's return to the White House, we should not jump to conclusions and should closely monitor his actions. For 2 days after the July 3rd call, Trump said, Putin is guilty, he doesn't want to stop the war. He mentioned sanctions and claimed to have discussed them with the Russian leader. His allies say he plans to address arms suspensions. Some Ukrainian analysts see a noticeable shift, maybe not a full U-turn, but significant. They expect key Senate decisions in July. Meanwhile, Americans I speak with are more skeptical. They feel Trump's words are just rhetoric and believe he still sympathizes with Putin. Do you think there's a middle ground here?
Они там за прекрасным океаном, ощущая непрекрасные последствия, в частности, политики внутренней Трампа, и сетовая на тот один прекрасный закон, значит, говорят, что это Трамп все говорит, а на самом деле Путина он дальше любит необъяснимой любовью, и никакого прессинга на него не будет.
I don't think Trump has any inexplicable sympathy for Putin. Even if there is personal sympathy between them, it's hard to judge. I'm not familiar with the history of their relationship. But it is clear that Trump is primarily defending his own interests and those of the United States. The idea of cutting aid to Ukraine is extremely unpopular in American society, including among Republican congressmen. Perhaps this is a domestic political maneuver. Trump had serious difficulties in passing the so-called Great Bill. After approval in Congress, it went to the Senate where it was amended, and then the document went back to Congress. where Trump did not have a majority. In this situation, complex behind-the-scenes negotiations could have been going on, and the temporary suspension of arms deliveries, ostensibly due to the lack of resources in the United States itself, could have been part of this internal game.
Часть этих игр была, значит, замораживание поставок оружия, которого якобы американцам самим не хватает.
I find it hard to imagine that the Americans are really short of weapons. They have enormous stockpiles dating back to the Cold War, and they have not given Ukraine the most modern systems as it is. If we talk, for example, about Patriot missiles or other types of weapons, not to mention Stingers, all of this is equipment that the US is unlikely to need in the near future. I think this was about domestic political gamesmanship. Eventually, their great law was passed, and immediately afterward Trump said he would personally oversee the situation. Rumors have surfaced that Hexlet and J.D. Vance are supposedly going behind his back, trying to limit aid to Ukraine, but I don't believe that. Trump, in my opinion, has complete control of the Republican Party and his administration. I don't think anyone in his inner circle is capable of running an independent game without his knowledge. Political maneuvers are going on all the time. Trump is playing risky but well-thought-out combinations. Just remember how he and Israel played a strategic gambit against Iran.
Можно даже сказать, опасные игры, но, посмотрите, как вот Трамп и Израиль разыгрывали этот гамбит против Ирана.
At present, arms deliveries to Ukraine are no longer publicized, neither by the Europeans nor by the Americans. What exactly is being transferred and in what quantities is being kept behind the scenes, and this is absolutely correct. It is not clear why before it was necessary to report in detail how much was approved, how much was transferred, how much Ukraine has already received, and how much is still expected. This is a gift for Putin's intelligence service. Now there is no such information, and this is a step forward. Exactly what game Trump is playing with Putin is still unclear, but one gets the impression that Trump really wants to end the war and incorporate that into his political capital. He has already taken credit for preventing a war between Pakistan and India and for ending the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, a war that has intermittently lasted since 1994, cost millions of lives and caused a humanitarian catastrophe. But the conflict was of little interest to the world community, perhaps because there were no Palestinians there.
Война, которая, между прочим, с небольшим перерывом велась с 1994 года. То есть это война, которая длилась 30 лет, и там миллионы погибших, и миллионы беженцев, и миллионы голодающих и так далее. Но почему-то никого это не интересовало в мире, потому что там не было палестинцев, по всей видимости.
He ended that war, destroyed Iran's nuclear program with Israel. Now he seeks to end the conflict in Gaza and then the war between Russia and Ukraine. He wants to fulfill his promise, to end the wars, to stop the bloodshed, and to appear to the world as a decisive leader who will not allow anyone to disrupt the order. And of course, to win the Nobel Peace Prize for that. I think he is really sincere in his desire to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. At the same time, he realizes that there is already readiness on Zelensky's part. The Ukrainian president agrees to sit down at the negotiating table at any moment. Putting pressure on him is pointless. Right now, Trump is interested in a ceasefire and the start of negotiations. What will be discussed next and how realistic it is an open question.
Его интересует сейчас именно это, прекращение огня, и стороны садятся за стол переговоров. Что там дальше они будут обсуждать, и насколько это реально, нереально.
I don't think these issues are on Trump's mind yet. He thinks a deal is still possible. But when he hears unrealistic statements and demands from Putin, such as giving Ukraine territories that Russia does not control and is unlikely to seize, he, as a man who considers himself the best negotiator in the world, realizes that such conditions are in fact a refusal to negotiate. He sees a ceasefire and fixing the line of demarcation as a realistic scenario. These are conditions that, in his opinion, Zelensky is ready for, but Putin does not agree to. In this context, Trump recognizes that it is Putin who remains the main obstacle to peace. Congress is already discussing Lindsey Graham's bill on secondary sanctions against countries that help Russia and refuse to support Ukraine. Trump has mentioned this several times, and it remains to be seen how the situation will unfold. I still believe, as I have in the past, that we are in a process and there is much more to come. We have had emotional swings in Israel too, and this sense of change is familiar.
Посмотрим. Я вот как считал, что мы еще видим эту ситуацию в развитии, так и до сих пор это утверждаю, потому что у нас в Израиле тоже были, такие эмоциональные качели.
First came reports that J.D. Vance allegedly told off Benjamin Netanyahu, accusing him of dragging the U.S. into a foreign war that could lead to a global nuclear conflict. Then suddenly it was revealed that Trump had allegedly started talks with Iran. This caused a shock. Israel seriously thought that Trump had turned his back, decided to negotiate with Tehran, and buy cheap oil from it. Panic ensued. All was lost. There would be a new deal like under Obama. Iran would get nuclear weapons, and there was no way to oppose Trump. Sentiment swung wildly. But then Trump issued an ultimatum, saying he was ready to go to war in 2 weeks, and that deadline was about to expire. The very fact that he talked about military intervention at all came as a surprise to everyone in Israel. We live in a state of constant emotional swings, and later it turned out that there was no conversation between J.D. Vance and Netanyahu. It was all a fabrication.
Это вообще фейк, и не было никакого разговора между Джей Ди Венсом и Нетаньяху, то есть просто это придумали.
I think this was done intentionally to make it seem as if there were serious differences between Israel and the U.S. Rumors surfaced that Trump had allegedly forbidden Netanyahu from attacking Iranian targets, and then that he did give permission. It all looked like a carefully played game that really took the Iranian regime by surprise. But it was impossible to do serious analysis under such conditions. We were constantly being tossed from side to side. The emotional background was changing every day. To maintain consistency, I have always said, we are watching a process evolve. You should not take one moment and make global conclusions from it. Everything happens in dynamics, and much remains behind the scenes. There is too much closed information. It is better to wait for concrete results before making final conclusions. From the beginning, it didn't seem plausible to me that there really is a serious conflict between the Trump administration and Netanyahu.
Идет некий процесс, который мы не всегда понимаем до конца, поскольку там очень много есть всяких тайных, секретных вещей. И давайте дождемся, пока мы увидим какие-то плоды этого процесса, потому что пока выводы делать рано. И, мне с самого начала не очень верилось в том, что такой идет разлад между администрацией Трампа и Нетаньяху.
From the very beginning, all of this made me suspicious. We were thrown into emotional swings. Say Trump betrayed. He is about to recognize a Palestinian state. He needs rich Arab allies. He wants to normalize relations with Iran. He forgave the Houthis and so on. But we see that none of this is true. As for Ukraine, I don't see any reason to panic either. We should not give in to alarmist sentiments. Nothing is lost yet. Even if Trump makes moves we don't like, he often backs down quickly, especially on Ukraine. So let's wait. In any case, the Kremlin feels much less confident in the world today than it did under Biden. Back then, Putin felt virtually untouchable, a man who was allowed to do anything. Now the situation has changed.
Кремль сегодня в мире чувствует себя гораздо менее уверенным, чем это было при Байдене. Да, при Байдене Путин был кум королю, то есть он вообще чувствовал себя абсолютно безнаказанным и человеком, который может делать все, что угодно.
Today, the situation has changed. Putin realizes that in the White House now sits a man with an unpredictable character who can act impulsively and harshly if something does not go according to his plan. Therefore, one should not panic and give in to anxious moods. There is even a term, anti-Trump syndrome, when everything Trump says or does is perceived as a catastrophe and the end of civilization. There is no need to go to such extremes. Yes, Trump is a man who makes mistakes, can take words back, makes contradictory statements, forgets details, needs prompting. That said, he stands out brightly from other politicians, and there really is something going on with him. He is active, constantly present in the information space, living in the rhythm of modernity. Unlike Putin, who still doesn't seem to understand what the internet is, Trump is not disconnected from reality.
Забывает какие-то вещи, которому что-то напоминает, но в любом случае это человек, который, ну, ярко выделяется на общем фоне, и, по крайней мере, что-то происходит. Экшена очень и очень много. Человек, который сидит в социальных сетях постоянно, ну, по крайней мере, он соответствует современным понятиям, и он не оторван от жизни настолько, насколько, например, Путин, который вообще не знает, что такое интернет.
We'll see, but he only holds meetings by video link. It's the only tech in his world, Zvi. Look, you've seen him yourself conducting either a meeting or an interview. He had Windows XP on the screen, a system that hasn't been supported in a decade. It's really true. We have literally 2 or 3 minutes left. Zvi, do you think Netanyahu and Trump will discuss the topic of the Russia-Ukraine war, or will the issue not come up at all? Or still in some context, assistance, coordination. Trump is known to always discuss the whole range of issues. If he talks to Putin, he brings up Iran. If he talks to Netanyahu, he talks about Ukraine. He tries to link everything together, so I have no doubt that this issue will also be touched upon.
Он обсуждает Украину и так далее. То есть, ну, мы видим, что он так пытается все увязать друг с другом, поэтому я не сомневаюсь, что что-то там, конечно же, будет говориться.
Another thing is that it is not quite clear how Israel can influence the process between Russia and Ukraine. It has already made its contribution. It has weakened Russia's position by depriving it of support from Assad and Iran, thereby knocking out part of its so-called global south from Moscow. But in terms of foreign policy, it is hard to say what more Israel can do for Ukraine. It is now in a position of isolation itself, having become a kind of pariah that many are uncomfortable dealing with. Israel has practically no channels of influence on the international community, except for the United States. Nevertheless, I am sure that Trump and Netanyahu will discuss the whole range of issues. They always do. Trump ties everything together and does not forget tasks, even if they concern other directions. The main focus now is on the concept of the new Middle East. He promises a new dawn, peace and prosperity in the region. We shall see, God willing, if that is what happens. But what the final decision on Gaza will be is still an open question. In any case, Trump is eager to end the war in Gaza at any cost. He does not want to waste any more resources and time on it, because he has ambitious plans, and he intends to move forward, as he says himself, on his armored train.
В любом случае, Трамп хочет закончить в Газе войну любой ценой. Трампу больше не надо там возиться, потому что у него далеко идущие планы, и он хочет уже лететь вперед на своем бронепоезде.
So I hope that as soon as next Monday, in the United States it will be a day, we have Tuesday night. We will hear the news that the war is over. I would very much like to believe that that will happen in the next few days. Hamas, despite its remaining demands, looks ready for a deal. It is exhausted and weakened by the Israeli army's actions, which have been fair and decisive. So there is reason to believe that the denouement is near. Zvi, I think just next week, closer to the midterms, we'll be able to talk about where all of this is headed, what decisions Trump has made, what are the consequences of his precipitous moves. And of course, we will come back to the Russian-Ukrainian war, because you and I have always seen these two conflicts as interconnected. Thank you for your interest, your work, and for joining us. See you soon. Have a great day. That was Zvi Zilber, Israeli journalist and editor-in-chief of Better Radio. I'm Iryna Uzlova. Friends, subscribe to the Better Radio YouTube channel. Link below. Don't forget YouTube 24. Like, comment, and stay with us. Take care. We will win.
Лайки, комментарии. Всегда приятна ваша активность и ваше общение. Берегите себя. Увидимся и победим.